Right, we take you back to the briefing by the Minister of Electricity, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa. This is on the progress made regarding the implementation of the Energy Action Plan.
Renewable energy capacity that should come onto the grid. There are major issues with regards to the grid in relation to its configuration to be able to accommodate new generation capacity that is located in the areas where we don't have a grid capacity. So we have established work stream number 10 that is working with us at Newcom. That is just solely focused on the transmission side. And then they have about 5 broad areas of work. So they just recently started their work, and of course we are going to occasion an opportunity for us to just share with you extensively on the work that we are doing, but just to elevate the areas of focus of the transmission work group. The first one is to ensure that we address the issues around the expansion of the grid. And in this relation, we are going to do a number of things. We are tracking about 25 projects in the existing substations that will potentially unlock about 13 gigawatts of energy, including the 1 gigawatt self-build IPP projects in the next 5 years. So we're looking to track those projects, like I said, 25 in the existing substations, so that we're able to enable these 13 gigawatts of projects to come on stream in the next 5 years. And then we also are tracking 22 projects that are classified as expedited that will unlock about 24 gigawatts of grid capability by 2023. So in the next 10 years, we think that it's possible for us to be able to have an additional 24 gigawatts that are expedited on the expedited track, so that we are able to make good of our commitment, in part to ensure that we decarbonize. And we did identify transmission side to be an area of constraint, if you like. So it's something that requires attention to enable this work to happen. And then we also internally in government are addressing, of course, in the context of the work that Mr. Dix has been doing with the team at Operation Vulindlela, address the issues of the need for us to expedite the regulatory approvals, the issues around the EIAs, the water use license, issues around access to servitude or rather land to be able to provide the necessary infrastructure that is going to support the rollout of this transmission capacity. So I'm just saying, in the context of the workstream 10, that also constitutes an area of focus. But of course, we have been doing exceptional work led by Mr. Rudy Dix on Operation Vulindlela together with the team. And then there will be a focus area on regional interconnectors. So as you know that we want to ensure that we explore and maximize the potential of international connectors and trade, which include identifying the catalytic projects required by the region. So it's important that we also contribute to the self-sufficiency, energy sufficiency of the region. As you know, that South Africa is a major anchor in relation to energy security in this area, and if we have the kind of challenges that we are having, we are also threatening the security, energy security of the neighboring countries. So it's important that when we have this conversation about transmission, it's not necessarily domesticated to South Africa, but we have a much more bigger scope, if you like, a regional perspective of how we want to address the opportunity, the challenges first, and then opportunities going into the future. And then we also are going to be addressing another area of the funding. I did make mention the last time that the expansion and the strengthening of the grid is going to take require an inordinate amount of money. And of course, the ESCOM balance sheet is not in a position to finance the kind of expansion that is required, both the scale and the speed at which we need to respond to the need on the transmission side, the ESCOM balance sheet will not necessarily be sufficient to be able to support that. And of course, we need to think creatively around what is it that we'll be doing to address that. So really, those are the areas that are of focus. So what we have been doing, I think, in the past few weeks, the work stream was to, if you like, determine the parameters, essentially what is the objective of the work stream, and those are the 4 key objectives. And then we do accept that there's going to be ad hoc requests and projects that requires the attention on the transmission side. We'll take those on an as and when basis, but the overall, if you like, framework of how we are going to be executing our work as work stream number 10 on transmission, like I said, is expansion of the grid, is the issues of regulatory approvals. The third one is the regional interconnectors, and the fourth one is the financing of the effort that they will be making going forward. And then let me take you through what has been the performance of the grid over the past week. I think this is going to be very helpful just for us to have an appreciation of where we are now as I speak to you. So I'm going to just share with you so that you have a better appreciation of where we are. So the first thing is that you can see that the 5-day average ending I think the 21st of July, the average available capacity has been about 28,643. And of course, when we started the week, there was a significant ramp up. Remember the last time when I stood in front of you, I did indicate that there was an expectation that by the 18th, we're going to receive an additional 5,000 megawatts. And indeed, we're able to return a significant number of those 12 units that were out. We had indicated that we expected to return about 12 units by the 18th of July. And of course, as those units returned, and there's been a number of units that went out. And this points to the fact that I've been raising all along, is that there's a need for us to ensure that we are able to continue to improve, if you like, the reliability of these units. I think it's particularly unhelpful when ESCOM has to go out from time to time with the announcement of the intensity of load shedding. I think there was one day where we shifted the intensity of load shedding about 3 times in a space of about 6 hours. And I think that undermines, one, the credibility of our efforts, but two, the ability of industries and households to be able to plan, because they would affect at lower stages of load shedding on account of our statements, the announcement, the alerts that we are releasing. And when people reorganize their lives in that way, then we elevate the intensity of load shedding. It's something that requires attention, and I'll share with you much later what is it that we think will happen as and when the opportunity for us to add additional megawatts on the grid. I think it's going to give us an opportunity to take a number of these units out, ensure that we work on their reliability, so that when we make the promise of stage X, you don't find that much later we then have to make an amendment to that announcement and say stage X plus Y, and therefore just undermines the credibility of the statements that we ESCOM is releasing from time to time. And then the additional area of focus still remains the work on the unplanned capability loss factor, the units that keeps on tripping. It's an area that requires our attention. I did make the point that we want to keep it at less than 15,000 megawatts, but you can see as a part of our optimistic scenario when we did the winter outlook, and you can see that we are not keeping to that. And we do admit that it's an area that requires attention, because, of course, it takes on the available capacity, and therefore the correction that you introduce as a result of the elevated UCLF is the instrument that you use is the intensification of load shedding. So that has got a direct bearing on the intensity of load shedding, and that's why I make the point that is an area that is receiving attention. Of course, I did make the point that when the unit trips, it means that they are out, they are not providing us megawatts, and that's why we need to make these efforts to make sure that we stop the units from tripping, and that's what then imposes on us the need to revise upwards the intensity of load shedding. On the partial load losses, I do make the point that the units are running, but they are not running at the capacity that is closer to what is the design capacity. So we need to make additional interventions to make sure that we are able to lower that. And of course, the PM focus still remains a primary driver, of course, of what is the extent of the delta or the gap between demand and generation. The higher the demand is and generation is not lifting to the levels that we want it to, then it means that the instrument available to the system operator is the intensification of load shedding. Of course, on the outage slips, when we started, I think since we started this, the lowest that we had gotten to was about 1,300 megawatts, and you can see now that we have added an additional 1,000 megawatts on the outage slip. So that performance that we've been seeing essentially has been reversed, and that's why it's important that we were able to address this. The outage slips is something that is within our direct control. We are the ones who make the
All right, Electricity Minister there, Dr. Kgosientsho Ramokgopa, basically just briefing there on the implementation of the Energy Action Plan. He says they are tracking 25 projects in the existing substations. This is to enable about 13 gigawatts into the system, and of course just went on to also address a range of other issues. We understand that line is back up. Let's take you there, back live.
Determination on when we think the units should come back on stream, having that the unit to meet that promise, and it's something that has to do with planning. We'll continue to improve on that, and the totality of this is that of course the levels of load shedding are not going down to where we want them to be, even with this elevated peak demand. My view when I was sharing with the team is that we should not be anyway upwards of stage 3, but it's something that is requiring our collective attention, and I do promise that we are addressing this with the agency that this is required. And then this is outside just the work that we've been doing in the last week. I think it's important that we are able to put it into context so that we get to have a trend analysis. So a trend in this instance is a period over about 4 weeks. That's a trend that we want to use. And then we then stretch it back to May to say where we are, if you had to do an instantaneous analysis, if you like, the current situation compared to where we are in May. Are we seeing any kind of improvements? And of course, what we are seeing is that we are seeing improvement on the generation side. So if you use the baseline of May, we were at about 27,000 megawatts. As I speak to you now, we have added an additional 1,600 megawatts. I'm talking about that average, the baseline of May vis-a-vis the past 5 days. And I think that's an area that is receiving additional attention from my side, so that we're able to see what is this trend. Of course, you are going to have peaks and troughs in that period, and then you average it, and then you compare that average with the baseline, and you are able to say with some degree of confidence whether we're making any significant progress, or there's a reversal, or we have plateaued. I think that's what this is attempting to answer. And of course, on the demand side, the expectation has always been that when you enter the latter parts of June and you enter into July, we are going to see the demand that is spiking, and of course that has kept to our own projections. You can see that the demand for July has been greater than any other period during this winter window. So this is not something out of the ordinary. This is not something that is unexpected. If anything, if you see that average demand essentially has been lower than what has been our worst case scenario of about 34,000 megawatts. We only experienced that about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. That's when we had about 33,900 megawatts. But all along, the demand has been on average about 30,000 megawatts. And like I said, this is outside our own projection. And then an area that we're beginning to elevate is there has to be a nuanced approach on our interventions. And I did say in one of the briefings that Gauteng accounts for, as a province, accounts for the highest load. So Gauteng accounts on average about 25% of the load. So the interventions that are made in Gauteng, they do matter. The weather situation in Gauteng does matter. When you are not able to have the benefit of PV when it's cloudy and then demand is rising, I think it's got a disproportionate impact on our ability to provide the megawatts, because if you do the totality of the megawatts available, we are also drawing from the renewables. I mean, just to give you a taste, I think it's about, was it Tuesday or Wednesday, Thursday or so, when we only drew about 37 megawatts from the renewables. I'm saying, and this is as a result of the overcast weather conditions. So the renewables did not come to the party at the time that we needed it because of the weather situation. And of course, once that weather situation is in Gauteng, you are going to have a disproportionate impact, if you like, on the grid performance, the outlook, and therefore it deteriorates, if you like, the intensity of load shedding. We are going to go to higher stages of load shedding. So what we are trying to illustrate here, if you look at national peak demand, and I'm talking about the peak demand, you will see that Gauteng on average accounts for just shy of 30%. So Gauteng does matter. Of course, it accounts for 1.2% of the total land mass of the country, but we know that it's a significant player both on the economy side and also in relation to the total population. And that's why we're working very closely with the Gauteng provincial government and also the municipalities in Gauteng so that we are able to coordinate and orchestrate jointly our intervention so that they get the necessary traction that is desired, and then the returns are greater. If you had to use the Pareto principle, once we intervene in Gauteng, 20% of the effort, you are likely going to receive 80% of the return. So that's how we're looking at it, that there's a need for us to make additional interventions here in Gauteng. I made the point around the outages, the load losses, and the outage slips. And when you pull all of these things together, they talk to the balance of the grid. And when there's a deterioration in relation to outages, in relation to partial load losses, in relation to outage slips, all that does, it degrades, if you like, your generation capacity, and therefore the instrument at the disposal of the system operator is just to intensify the levels of load shedding. And that's why we have to be focused on these three elements to ensure that the generation capacity is able to be improved. Essentially, these three areas, they talk to what we know, that once the 4 units of Kusile comes on stream, of course, there's a unit 5 that is projected to come in October, and then the 3 units, 1, 2, 3, that were affected by the flue gas desulfurization units. The last one comes on stream on the 24th of December. That's going to give us, like, as we project, approximately about 3,000 megawatts of additional generation capacity. And when that comes on stream, and of course, given what we are expecting to be lower demand because we'll be into summer conditions, then we must ramp up, if you like, planned maintenance so that we are able to ensure that we build the necessary resilience to ensure that we don't have these unit failures from time to time, and then ESCOM is then expected to be revising, if you like, their projection with regards to the schedules of load shedding. Like I said, when we revise it too often, it just eats into the credibility of our messaging, and then it undermines the ability of industry and household to respond and adjust to the projected load shedding. And that's why we think that in addition, just to give us additional generation capacity, we are going to use that window to ramp up plant maintenance so that we are able to get the necessary resilience that is required to be able to ensure that when we say load shedding is behind us, it's truly behind us. Even if you are to experience, as expected, units that are failing, that will not trigger the need for us to be able to introduce a stage of load shedding because we have built the necessary buffer. I'll leave it here and then we'll take questions. Thanks.